Well, I'll be moderating the Etherpad from down here, but please welcome the component leads and Stormy Peters.
So good morning. This is your chance to ask them all the questions you've been dying to ask them for the last year. But this isn't your only chance, so ask questions here. You can enter them in the Etherpad, but also catch them during the conference. So make sure you get your questions answered, and here's your chance. I'm going to start out by having everybody introduce themselves. And I was trying to think of an interesting question, and there's like the one that's the perennial debate. I'm going to ask them for their name, obviously, and what they work on, but what editor did you start using when you first started coding? And is it still the same one you use now for Ceph? And if not, why not? So Patrick, would you like to lead us off?
Sure. So I'm Patrick Donnelly. I'm the CephFest tech lead, and the editor I first started using was Vi, not Vim. And I use Vim now because it's improved.
I'm Sebastian Wagner, tech lead for the orchestrator. And there was an IDE for Delphi that was completely blue and it was a terminal IDE. That was my first real editor for coding.
And do you still use it now?
No.
What do you use now?
I'm an IDE guy, so I'm using PyCharm.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ricardo Dias. I'm representing LensGrimmer for the dashboard component lead. I think I probably started with Windows Notepad for coding a long time ago. Of course, I'm not using that anymore. And yeah, that's good.
What are you using now?
Nowadays, VS Code, I think.
You're not sure? Sorry.
It really depends if I'm in the terminal or not. So.
All right. Thanks.
I'm Casey Bodley.
Borrow his mic. Yeah.
I'm Casey Bodley, the tech lead for RGW. My first IDE was Visual C++. It's been a while since I've worked on Windows, though, so it's Vim for me.
Hello, my name is Jason Dillerman. I'm the lead of RBD. I think technically the first editor I used was on a Commodore 64, the screen editor for BASIC. Moving off to PCs, it would have been like Edlin or something like that in MS-DOS. But nowadays, it's Vim.
Well.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Neha Ocha, and I'm the tech lead for Rados. I've been using Vim all along. I still use it.
I'm Sage Weil. I have a vivid memory of a friend walking me through using Edlin over the phone. It didn't go very well. Used Visual C++ for a while, and then Pico briefly, and now I use Emacs because it's the best.
Awesome. Obviously, people share your opinion. So on the Etherpad, you can enter in questions. I'm going to try to ask. I'm not sure I'll be able to get to all of them, but we'll ask some of them, and we'll try to answer others later. If you have questions, keep adding them. If I ask your question wrong, feel free to jump up and wave your hands and say that's not it. But there were a couple questions about how to get started. So if somebody came to the conference, they've been following Ceph for a while, they've been using it, they have questions about how to use it better, and now they want to contribute, how would they start contributing? Maybe a couple of you could give a suggestion for how to get started? How do you find something that's manageable for a new person to start with?
Personally, I think one of the nicest and easiest ways to get started and get acclimated to the code base would be to help with the backporting effort. When we fix bugs in the current release of software, that same bug might affect previous releases of the software, and patches don't necessarily apply cleanly, so it's not just a matter of running git cherry pick and calling it a day. So that effort is very important for the stability and maintainability of Ceph, and that's a great place just to get familiar with the software in general at a high level.
Hand him a mic.
I was asking you.
there is a backport team. I think it's Abhishek and
Nathan, Abhishek, probably Yuri
I,
as well.
And I think if you go to ceph.com, I think they're actually listed there about who to contact.
Awesome.
Yeah, the only thing I would want to add is, so we do realize that the getting started page in Ceph is not as complete as we would like it to be. And we've had a discussion, interestingly, just day before yesterday, that we are going to improve it so that there are basic things that you can get out of it, and things like where you should get started will be there, and you can just go start looking at those links. Other than that, we have a couple of other things that we're doing. We have this effort called DocuBetter, which is a way in which you can contribute to the docs, which is a simple way that you can get started with contributing to and even create pull requests. So we have now an edit on GitHub link on the docs page. If you find a bug, you can go just fix it, even without going through the whole process of creating and cloning a repo and doing all that stuff. And the other thing, I think we've almost done it, and we've started doing it at least, is in our Redmine tracker, we have also started including a tag for bugs with low, medium, and high difficulty levels. So if you find anything which is low, medium, just go pick it up, I'd say.
Awesome.
I think one thing I want to add is that part of the reason why the learning curve for Ceph is steep is because it's at some level it's just complicated, and it's written in C++, and not everybody is a C++ developer. But since I think it was Kraken actually, we have the new Ceph manager that has the whole Python runtime, and a lot of the newer and more like visible features are the integrations with Ceph that automate management functions, integrations with Prometheus, all the orchestration stuff I've been talking about is all written as Python modules in the manager. So I think the barrier to entry to write meaningful new features is much lower. You can pretty simply implement new Ceph CLI commands by writing a few dozen lines of Python.
Oh, and I also want to add that we have even more space because we have space for web developers to contribute to Ceph dashboard. So it's currently it's Angular 2. So yeah. Complex Ceph is a very big project and it has so many components that are developed in different languages. So there's space for almost any kind of programmer.
And so one of the suggestions was if you wanted to contribute to write docs, there's actually several questions about documentation and how are we going to get more people writing documentation, and then how do we get the documentation that's in vendor-specific sites into the upstream project. Any thoughts on that? There might not be a plan yet, but any thoughts on how we could get started?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple sort of problem areas or challenges, I would say, with documentation. The first is that the information architecture, the structure of the documentation was conceived and put together like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it hasn't really been updated since then. So at some level, somebody needs to sit down and say, we should just organize this differently. And I think there are a lot of models to look at. And most other successful open source projects, when you go to the docs, it's very clearly targeted at somebody how do I get this up and running as quickly as possible? Or how do I get a user to some sort of success in a short amount of time? And so I think even just taking a fresh approach and trying to figure out what that kind of introduction should look like would be helpful. But the other part of that is just that a lot of the documentation that's there is just out of date. So just reading the documentation, anybody who is a current operator of Ceph and has sort of a sense of what the current state of the art is, just reading through the documentation, you'll very quickly see that oh, this isn't actually quite what it should be now. And those edits are super easy to do because of the new GitHub link on every page.
Awesome. So we want to update the docs, and all of you can help. All right, so the audience can help me out. If you're entering in questions, there's no way we're going to answer all these questions in this half-hour session. So the people that are adding +1s to questions, that's awesome. So add +1s to the questions you want to see answered. Will we have this is a tongue twister. Will we have deduplication in the Ceph? It's
yes.
got lots of votes.
Yes, almost certainly yes. at some point. not gonna make any promises as far as when it's gonna happen, but there is ongoing work with deduplication. There's a group at SK that's been working diligently at this. I think that there's a general view of how it's going to be implemented so that it's actually a distributed dedupe. So if you write in a scalable way, if you write the same data twice, it's always going to dedupe to one thing. The challenge really is around ensuring, figuring out what the actual savings are that you're going to be able to experience in practice. Because one of the properties of the current architecture is that the smaller the sort of dedupe granularity and chunk size, the more inefficient the metadata is and the slower the reads are going to be. So there's going to be sort of a fundamental trade-off between space efficiency and performance if you try to read the data later. And so what we're focusing on right now is creating a tool that will let you scan an existing data set with different chunking parameters to try to figure out what the actual ratios are that we're going to get in practice. And once we have that available and we get real users to run that on real data sets, we'll have a better idea of what the benefits and savings are going to be, and that'll help us prioritize and focus our efforts.
So another one that's getting upvoted is there's several clients like user mode, kernel, and BD. How do people know which one, which client supports which feature and which one they should choose if they're thinking about things like performance?
So from an RBD point of view, just the general rule of thumb is KRBD is probably going to be faster, 10-ish% faster, depending on your workloads. But it's always going to lag behind in terms of what features it can support just due to the complexity of getting changes into the kernel and just the lead time of getting those kernel updates to various operating systems. We, nowadays on the docs page, we didn't used to have a good mapping about what RBD features specifically were supported by what versions of the kernel. We're trying to be better at that. We do now have some documentation to say, here's the upstream kernel version where these features are available in the KRBD driver. That doesn't apply to things like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, where things are backported, but it's not, they're not. Those are features that are not in the 3.x kernel that Red Hat is based off of. In terms of when to use what, right now a lot of those choices are probably made by your orchestration tool. If you're using libvirt or directly in your tying in VM images, it's going to use librd, tell QEMU to use librd. If you're using Kubernetes in a CSI, it's going to be using KRBD because KRBD needs a block device. We're talking about the NBD, that's the network block device. There's the RBD driver for that. That uses librd, so that's a way that you can use the newer features of RBD that are not currently available in your kernel driver and still expose those via a block device that Kubernetes can ingest. There's probably equivalent statements for the CephFS side of things.
Microphone down here.
Yeah, for CephFS, most of what Jason said about RBD also applies to CephFS. Generally, we try to keep feature parity between the kernel and the Ceph views. And really, when we say Ceph views, we're talking about libCephFS, which is also being used by, for example, Ganesha when you're exporting CephFS with NFS. More recently, we're actually looking at adding performance improvements and focusing on the kernel. Sage was talking earlier about how we're looking at doing asynchronous unlink and create, and that work is being focused in the kernel for mostly technical reasons, but also we think that the improvements are going to be more impactful in the kernel rather than in the user space client library right now.
So by the way, you can't vote for the same question 5 times because I can see your color. So is there any plan on erasure code across multi-site? Anyone take that? Can you take that one?
Not that I know of.
Has there been a request for it that you've heard? Is there thought about it?
I
Brand new
haven't
request?
heard it discussed, no.
Then you should probably submit an issue and ask for it.
Yeah,
Whoever submitted that
it's
one.
interesting.
Yeah. Are we still investing in OpenStack Cinder?
Yeah, we, or at least from our point of view, I still talk to maintainers and watch the PRs or their equivalent of tracker tickets that come in against the Cinder drivers. So it's still actively being developed. It's still actively being maintained. And I think we have a good back and forth. It's just a little bit different environment now because it's more of a mature product, and we're not the ones driving the innovation and integration there. They now have a good team, and they're trying to integrate features directly. Like when Cinder added the multi-site replication feature, they help pull in that feature and tie that into RBD mirroring. Multi-attach, same thing. That was driven from the Cinder point of view, not from us pushing the feature to them.
So there's a lot of interest in reads from all replica OSDs. Please? Does someone want to talk about that?
I would caution people who want to read from all replicas, because usually it makes things slower, because it means that for any given piece of data, it might exist in 3 caches instead of just 1 cache, which means that all of your caches are 1/3 as efficient. I remember, it was a long time ago now, it's probably almost 10 years ago, but I spent like a week trying to construct a workload and a benchmark that would actually show a performance improvement by reading from multiple caches, and I couldn't do it. And it really means that your bottleneck has to be like, you have to be saturating individual NICs on single replicas. And those types of workloads at the Rados level are exceedingly rare. I guess, yeah.
The only thing I would like to add is that the Rados paper has a good explanation of why we decided to not do that. So maybe just revisiting that paper for those of you who are interested would be useful.
And so for everyone interested in the roadmap question, I'm going to close with that one. So hold on to that thought. The majority of our pain points in Object are LevelDB, RocksDB related. Are there any plans to work on this in upstream?
We do agree that our problems are with RocksDB. LevelDB, I think we don't use anymore, so that pain is gone. But I think we are trying to find ways around the existing problems, but we are not really, we have some contributions that have been made to upstream RocksDB, but they've been, the encouragement of acceptance of pull requests have been, a challenge for us, I guess. So I guess we internally are trying to fix issues by doing things differently rather than fixing the code base of RocksDB.
Just a couple things to add to that. The 2 things that I mentioned on BlueStore, one was sharding the metadata in BlueStore over multiple RocksDB instances. That guidance came from the RocksDB community. Lots of RocksDB users do that in other projects in other contexts, and so that was why we were trying it. And the other one item was around TRocksDB, which is a fork modification of RocksDB by Toshiba, I believe. That is basically implementing a concept that was demonstrated in the research community and adding that to RocksDB. And I think our focus there is going to be to work with them and the RocksDB community to use Ceph as sort of a driving use case that demonstrates that this change is actually valuable to a real workload and a real user, so that we can get that in upstream. It's unlikely that we would ever actually use TRocks in Ceph unless it is in upstream RocksDB. So the path is going to be to work with that community.
So I have another OpenStack related question. Will Ceph replace Swift and OpenStack, and will Swift die?
Yeah, that's hard for me to say. yeah, we tend to see a lot more use of the S3, and so that's where most of our focus has been. In terms of Swift usage, yeah, I'm not sure.
I would add just that there are a lot of very successful, very large-scale Swift deployments out there. There are several public clouds that use RGW to back their S3 service, and there are also several very large public clouds that use Swift to back their object storage. And I don't see them rushing to change technologies. It's working for them, so more power to them.
All right, so there was a question, one of the early people asked how you all work together. So when you're thinking about questions like this, difficult questions for the project moving forward, what you're gonna put your resources on, how do you all work together? Like on a given day, how do you communicate with each other? Let's hear from someone who hasn't talked in a while. Go for it.
Yeah, we have, of course, IRC. We have a weekly call with the leadership team. And of course, the SafeDevil mailing list, which is important.
I think the only two of us that are in the same office are Patrick and Neha. And I view that as almost a coincidence. For the most part, the team is very distributed, so we use a lot of, I spend half my morning on BlueJeans in the various stand-ups and synchronization calls just to like check in on what pull requests are in flight, what we're working on, what our focus areas, discuss whatever random issue has come up. So a lot of BlueJeans.
So you're talking on IRC, you have weekly meetings on BlueJeans. Do you always agree on everything? Do you debate things? Do you vote? How does that discussion, what's it look like?
So sometimes we have short meetings on BlueJeans and we are not convinced about things. We follow it up on IRC and there's probably like, conversations going on for half an hour and a lot of them are like, just between like two people just trying to, sort it out and trying to come to a conclusion. So I think IRC helps a lot that way. And it's the good part is that we use channels like SafeDevL, where a lot of other people who probably are interested in the same conversation get to participate as well and put across their points. So I think the initial, I think the best part of it is the collaboration we get to do by means of IRC.
Cool. So IRC is the main collaboration point. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, because we're a global team and cross-company, we really do have to embrace the open source methodologies, and that means using like the mailing lists and GitHub and public code review. There's no real other way to do it. We don't have secret back channels where we do development and argue. Generally during meetings that we do have over the phone or on BlueJeans, we don't usually disagree too much. If we're gonna discuss some code at length, it's usually gonna be public on a GitHub pull request. And so if you want to get involved, you don't need to find the right secret meeting room. You just need to get involved on GitHub and you'll find us there.
And so these conversations on BlueJeans and GitHub and IRC, can other people see them? So you could all go watch it happen live.
Some BlueJeans calls are, the community calls are recorded and are published afterwards on YouTube, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our stand-ups are now on the community calendar, so anybody can come join them as well if they are interested.
So I'd like to close with the question that's gotten the most votes. I don't think it's the same person a lot of times. I think it's actually a lot of you. There's a question about, is there a plan to publish a roadmap? It seems like a lot of features are often decided on the spot. So for someone watching, it seems like it's just happening kind of ad hoc. So I thought each of you could take a chance to tell us, not when the roadmap's going to be published, although if you know that, please share. But like, what's next in mind for you in the part that you're working on? Like, what are you thinking about right now? Because it's probably not ad hoc. You've probably been having discussions and thinking about it. So what's next in mind for you right now in the spot you're working on? And how might someone follow that conversation or that thought process? Why don't we start at this end? You ready to go first?
Okay. For SFS, yeah, we don't really publish a roadmap. that a lot of that, keeping up to date with what we're working on involves, coming to the stand-up. A lot of projects that we do work on, sometimes they're long shots, and it's difficult to predict when they'll actually finish. But otherwise, one of the tools you can look at to kind of get an idea of what our priorities are is to look at the Ceph tracker and look at the next release, the target release field in the tracker and do a search. And that'll kind of give you a rough idea of what our priorities are. Some tickets could probably have their priorities refreshed, so it's not always a great indicator, but you can look at the assignees and see if there's any pull requests in flight and what's under development.
So you could use the Ceph tracker and search for the next release, and that's a roadmap of sorts. Great idea.
Oh, yeah, sometimes we have face-to-face meetings, like, for example, here, where we can develop future roadmaps. Yeah.
And what's top of mind for you right now? Sorry, I forgot to ask Patrick. Like, what you're working on right now, what's next for you?
I had a slide yesterday, what I was planning, or what we were planning to do in the near future. For the orchestrator, it's basically simple. Sage talked about it a few minutes ago.
And let's hand the mic back to Patrick. Patrick, do you want to tell us for CephFS what's next for you? Like, what's top of mind?
Right now, our priorities are getting the volume management for CephFS working so that we can integrate that more completely with across the various technologies that need to acquire volumes from CephFS, like Manila and Ceph CSI, the Kubernetes volume plugin. Having NFS Ganesha daemon clustering set up with the volume management, getting that UI very simple and easy to use for operators. And then we've been improving stability of CephFS a lot in MDS, and we're still working on that. And then there's also Jeff Layton's work to do the performance improvements of CephFS with the asynchronous creates and unlinks, which should help with various workloads that CephFS historically has been really bad at, like tar, untar, rsync.
So Ricardo, you want to tell us how someone could follow along and what's next to mind?
Yeah. So for Ceph dashboard, of course, we are always working on improving usability, but our main focus for the future is the integration with the orchestrator and allow for the users to do these day 2 operations like replace disks or adding OSDs or any other service. And we always have this work of keeping up with new features that appear on other components, right? If they are well suited for being managed by a GUI, we need to make sure that we plan that and we implement those.
So when you're planning for that, how do you know what's coming up? Where do you look for it?
Well, we actually have to ask the other component leaders what they are thinking, like what they are planning to do, and then we try to plan our own work. Yeah.
Thanks. Casey?
Yeah, I guess for RGW, there's several kind of longer-term projects going on around multi-site and multi-cloud tiering work. Definitely resharding for multi-site. And then there's some asynchronous refactoring work going on with the Beast front end. But if you want to follow along, the RGW stand-ups, there's constant discussions, the tracker issues, and on GitHub.
Awesome, thanks. Jason, what's next, and how would you follow along if you were somebody else?
So to follow along with what we have planned, we actually have a Trello board. It's a Ceph backlog, and we actually also have labels on. Everything's categorized. Here's things for core Rados. Here's things for RBD. Here's things for RGW. On the RBD board, we have everything labeled saying like for this upcoming Octopus release, everything that we want to try to tackle for this release, we have it tagged. Things that have already been merged, we've already, they've been moved to the merged in Octopus board. But for a high level of what we're planning for this next release, on the kernel side, KRBD, we're trying to just keep improving feature parity. I think the goal would be with the 5.3 kernel, we'll pretty much have everything or all RBD features with the exception of journaling and the new live migration feature that got added in Nautilus. On the lines of the live migration, we want to extend that some more. Right now it's live migration of images within the same cluster. We want to extend that so that we want to provide migration capabilities between different clusters, different clouds of workloads for Block. And just in general also performance. And the librd side, I've mentioned before, it's got performance overhead that makes it a little bit slower than KRBD. We want to keep taking out those CPU bottlenecks of, just to drive the IOPS and reduce the CPU per IOP in librd. And we also are trying to, right now in terms of ecosystems, we're heavily focused on Ceph CSI and doing a great job integrating with Ceph CSI and making RBD a perfect partner with Cube.
Neha?
So I think I have the same thing to say as Jason. Most of the broad level tracking in Rados happens in Trello. And the way we decide what we are going to be doing in a particular release is probably discussed in a forum like a CDM, which we do try to say, okay, this is what we are at least going to try for Octopus and what is realistic and what is not. And then there are obviously smaller meetings on BlueJeans, and sometimes stand-ups just from 15-minute stand-ups, they just become 45-minute stand-ups just discussing deeper things. But I would also like to add that for Crimson, we are using a separate GitHub project, and the tracking there is more granular about what are the broad level things that we want to do and what's getting merged every day. And it's pretty neat actually. Every pull request that gets merged, you can see it that this feature was something that we started working on. It's now merged, so tracking becomes really easy there. Other than that, I think the high-level focus areas for Rados and me are QoS, and that's something we want to come up. We want to come up with a plan, and also in the shorter term, we would like to focus on adaptive recovery, throttling. So, I mean, those are, I think, few areas that we'll be working on next.
Yeah, I'll just repeat the Trello thing. So I try to delegate as much as possible to these folks. I can't keep track of everything, and the project has scaled much beyond what I ever could have or would have wanted to have my hands in. And so the challenge for me is just keeping in sync with the rest of the leads, checking with them periodically and finding out what their plans are and what their focus is. And the way that I am able to do that is through that Trello board. So it's got a bunch of different lists and different categories. Some of them map directly to like RBD type component, but there are also a bunch of different meta categories like performance and integrations and so on. And on there we use labels for the things that we think we're going to be able to deliver for a particular release. So in the first few months of a release cycle, we have a series of meetings where we talk about all the stuff that's sort of on the table, and we tag what we think we're going to be able to do. And we periodically revisit that as the months go by and take things off or add things in that come up that we think are important. And then for me personally, I just try to try to have some view of the big picture and what the sort of key strategic things are that aren't getting any attention, and either try to cajole other community members into caring about those things, or pick something and focus on implementing that, because I'm usually happiest when I'm actually getting to develop something. But the getting started page that we keep talking about that isn't as good as it could be, but we're in the process of revising, we'll have links to, for example, the Trello board. So anybody can go look. It's a public Trello board, so you have to be a member to edit it, but you can go look at what all the stuff is. And as things get merged, they get plopped into the Nautilus or the Octopus category, so you can see progress as we move.
So thanks to all of you for all the great questions and for all the votes. I appreciate it. I want to give thanks to all the project leads for being willing to sit up here and take any question that you threw at them. So thanks for being brave and being up here. If you didn't get your question answered, now you know what they look like, where to find them. They're here for the rest of the day. I think at least one of you, a couple of you still have talks today. Who has a talk today? Ricardo? Okay, so if you want to hear more, there's another talk. So please find them, please talk to them, please thank them for their work, and thank you for all your questions.